So Mally, why don't you introduce our speaker?
Am I live now? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
ma'am.
Hello, everybody. It's been an eventful week for me, but I'm trying to overcome the joys that come with a broken wrist. But I'm in Charlotte with our son, Frank. Be home tomorrow. We are delighted today to have Ruth Burcaw with us to share with us information about I've known for a long time, knew her dad before she was or whatever. Yeah. Her dad, Harold Cole, was a member of Home Church and became a Moravian pastor. They were at Advent in Conoke Hills when I was teaching at Griffith, which was in that same area. Ruth has, I guess, for about a year now, been the first executive for City with Dwellings. Before that, she was our executive with a new board, the Board of Cooperative Ministries, which she and her staff did a very fine job. And that board is in the midst of reorganizing and changing. Ruth, we are delighted to have you with us. And while I'm here, I'd like to say that Emily Norris, who is with the Dwellings, which is a Moravian and Lutheran ministry, will be our speaker at our day of prayer on March the 2nd. And thank you for coming and thank you for suggesting to do Zoom.
Thank you, Mally. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm gonna share my screen and because I've got a few slides to share with you. But I do want to thank you all for having some interest in this topic. I've spoken to you before about church-related things, and I would say that the work I'm doing now is even more churchy than anything I've been doing before. And so I'm delighted to be able to be with you, and I will be with you again on February 16th for the Wednesday night program, and hope that we can delve more deeply into some of the issues we will touch on today at that point in time. So if you've got questions, then hopefully you can save some of them maybe for that Wednesday night in February. So let me get to my sharing screen options, and make sure that that's working as it should. So you should be seeing 5 things that you didn't know about homelessness. And I am getting some waiting room messages, Margaret. So I don't know, you may have given me hosting.
So I'll take care of that.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Co-host, you get all the rights and privileges thereof.
How nice. Well, I just want to make sure I'll let you do it. But I wanted to just talk a little bit today about homelessness in general and some of the things that you may or may not know about the state of homelessness. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about City with Dwellings. I've been the executive director there since really early August. So I'm in my 6th month now with City with Dwellings, and has been a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. I have to say there's a lot to learn and a lot to know. And especially during the pandemic, it's been an interesting and challenging, but also wonderful experience so far. So I'm thrilled to be here. So let's talk about 5 things you might not know about homelessness. Number 5, you can actually fill 5 football stadiums with the United States homeless population. And that ends up being about 600,000 people on a given night. This gets measured through what's called the point in time count that HUD does, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's really more of a snapshot than it is accurate. But I've got some other numbers here too that you can see. So in North Carolina, that number is more like around 9,000 folks at any given night who might be homeless. And then At the county level, that second number there, 504, is the number for Forsyth County, of folks that on any given night will either be in one of our traditional year-round permanent shelters or living out in the streets and the elements. This is another way to look at it. This is a more of a long-term sort of national snapshot of homelessness based on the HUD point in time count. So you can see we made some progress over time. That first line there, 647,000, is from 2007. And we had some steady decline going on, but then here in recent years, it's starting to go back up. And this, of course, these numbers are pre-pandemic numbers. So we do expect these numbers to go up quite a bit in the next year or so here. When you think about folks who are homeless, that is without permanent shelter, nearly basically 4 in 10 are actually sleeping outside or in places that are not fit for human habitation. We call them sometimes unsheltered, our unsheltered homeless population. This has become, the unsheltered homelessness has become much more prevalent in the last few years, especially. Had about a 30% increase in the last 2-3 years. So it is definitely a growing concern. And this is a group that City with Dwellings is very actively involved with, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The third thing you might not know is that being homeless is really, really bad for your health. Homeless people have an average life expectancy of about 50 years of age, 5 years lower than the country of Chad, which is one of the world's least developed countries where 40% of the population lives in poverty, right? So their life expectancy is worse than that of a third world country. In contrast, the US average life expectancy is 79 years of age. So while it's, of course, tragic, it is not really surprising, given that people who are homeless tend to be more likely to be sick, who are more likely to struggle with mental health or substance abuse concerns, and they're often victims of violent crime. So being homeless, not very good for one's mental or physical health. When we think about the local level, it's important to know that people are homeless for a lot of different reasons, but primarily people are homeless because there aren't houses, affordable, stable, safe houses. Winston-Salem actually is short about 16,000 units of safe, stable housing to meet the current need. And that is going up too as we come out of COVID and as some of the eviction moratoriums are over. We're slowly beginning to see not just the sort of normal, if you want to call it that, homeless population, but additional folks who have been teetering on housing instability as well. And this isn't just an issue for us here in Winston-Salem. For every 100 low-income households in the United States, only 21 safe and stable housing options exist, okay? So that means that about 80 households looking for this housing aren't finding it in the US. And then finally, know that anybody is at risk for homelessness. Millions more folks beyond our homeless population are living paycheck to paycheck and at risk of becoming homeless. And often one unexpected event like a car breaking down or a job loss or an eviction can put them on the street pretty quickly. And so, of course, that leads us to ask some other questions, right? When we think about these statistics, we start to think about some other questions. For example, who? If anybody can become homeless, who are we talking about really? And so this is sort of a snapshot of the kinds of folks that we're talking about. Families with children do make up about 30% of those experiencing homelessness at any point in time. Another way of looking at that is that 1 in every 30 children in the United States experience homelessness each year, 1 in 30. Children are homeless in every city and state nationwide. It's really an equivalent of about the population of Chicago, when you think about homeless children. So children for certain. There are quite a few homeless veterans, about 40,000 in the country. And more than half of the homeless veterans tend to have a mental or physical disability. And they tend to be more likely than non-veterans to be homeless, especially if they have low income or a mental health problem or a history of substance abuse. Often they're struggling with trauma, post-traumatic stress, or traumatic brain injuries as well. So that makes them at higher risk for homelessness. We have quite a few vulnerable adults, that's older adults, folks with disabilities. We see quite a lot of folks who have been chronically homeless, meaning that they have been homeless for really several years or for several episodes of homelessness, moving in and out of homelessness over time. And then there's a small population, so really about 3% of the homeless population that are youth and young adults, often folks who have become homeless for a variety of reasons, perhaps drug abuse, perhaps lack of family support. A lot of LGBTQ youth end up homeless as they are maybe invited to leave their homes. That's still an issue. So those are some of the folks. City with Dwellings works primarily with single adults and those experiencing unsheltered homelessness or a lot of chronic homeless folks. This also begs the question, why? Why are people homeless? And that is something we could talk about for a really long time. There's a lot to unpack with that question, and we will do that a little more on February 16th. But you can see here several of the primary reasons. Certainly the whole idea of rent increases, the lack of housing, there's nowhere to go. Even when folks qualify for housing assistance, which is fairly common, only about 20 or 25% are actually going to get it because of the lack of inventory of affordable housing. And then we've got high rates of sexual abuse and domestic violence. That's a common cause and consequence of homelessness, particularly for women. One study found that 92% of homeless women had experienced sexual or physical violence at some point in their lives. 92%. Certainly illness, disability, addiction. About a quarter to a third of homeless folks in the country have severe mental illness. And that could be things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, chronic severe depression. Those are kind of the most common. And then, finally, and this is really important and kind of where City with Dwellings comes into to play, they tend to have a lack of trustworthy relationships, and perhaps over time have burned some bridges, which resulted in a lack of or a loss of family or community or neighbors or friends supports. And so without this sort of social safety net, a lot of folks who've been couch surfing or have been able to make it from place to place suddenly no longer have that safety net and find themselves living outdoors or in a shelter. So where does City with Dwellings come into this picture? Many of you will know us because when you say the Overflow shelter, and you think about Reverend Russ May, who leads Anthony's Plot, he got a group of faith communities together back in 2012. It was an emergency. The traditional shelters were full, and there were still lots of folks living out on the streets. So Russ and some other folks from the various downtown churches got together, and several churches opened up their fellowship halls or other spaces, and they basically did, with purely volunteers, open up several shelters, allowing for folks who were able to go into the traditional shelters, giving them a safe, warm place to sleep at night. So that's how we began, is offering this emergency overflow shelter. And I will say Home has provided critical financial and volunteer support for that work over the years. So this is our 9th year offering the emergency overflow work. But we thank you for being an important person and organization in that work. In 2017, we incorporated as a nonprofit, And now our work really expands far beyond the emergency shelter. And I think a good way of helping to understand the work that we do is by showing you a really complicated map. But actually, this is what we call the Homeless Service Systems Map. And I think it does help explain why homelessness is so complex and so difficult to solve. But it's really the larger system that City with Dwellings is a part of. And we're working in what I would consider sort of three different buckets. We work on outreach and diversion with folks who are actively homeless. We work on emergency shelter when there's no room in the inn. And then we provide supportive housing for folks once they have perhaps found a housing unit and found some housing. And I can show you, if you see the little red circles on this map, on the left side, we start with what we call homeless prevention and diversion. So if someone comes to us and says, I've been evicted, or my brother can't keep me at his house anymore, we first work with them to see what other options are available. We try to get them a place in one of the traditional year-round shelters. And if that's not possible, we work with them on other options, family, friends, other kinds of things. Sometimes we might actually buy them a bus ticket and send them to Oklahoma to live with their mom, assuming, and we confirm this, that their mom is willing to take them in. So we do that kind of work, and that's really prevention and diversion. So we're trying to prevent homelessness. We're trying to prevent them from being on the street. Our outreach team does a lot of that. They also go out to our unsheltered homeless population to check on them, to transport them to doctors' offices, or take them to get their mail, do a variety of things there. We have peer support at City with Dwellings, meaning I think it's 5 of our employees currently are considered certified peer support specialists, meaning they have themselves experienced homelessness. And so they are particularly qualified to walk alongside our neighbors who experience homelessness and help them as they try to navigate a system that can be really tricky for those of us with master's degrees, much less folks who are finding themselves living under a bridge. So we're there in the middle as well, under outreach and peer support. And then you can see us over on toward the right side of the screen, where we're getting into housing options. There's some temporary housing options. There's what's called rapid rehousing, which tries to get folks into housing quickly and then work on them with some of their other issues relative to disabilities or health or mental health and those things. The HEART project is a pilot project that we're running right now. We have a peer support person who actually lives in an apartment complex with 4 other folks who, not in the same apartment, everyone has their own apartment, but we have 5 folks in this program right now. And Carlos, our peer support specialist, lives there too, to provide them with some on-site help. Someone who's been living under a bridge for 20 years isn't going to be able to go into an apartment and immediately just start living life to the fullest. There's a lot that has to be learned. There's a lot of documentation that has to be done. There's a lot of things like helping them understand how to do banking, how to grocery shop, how to create a menu and then actually cook themselves dinner from a recipe. Just these simple things are really challenging. And so our peer support folks really try to work with them to really basically support them in housing so they can be successful there and not return to homelessness. So that's an important piece. But this process, this map is not, it looks like a continuum of sorts, but it really is something that folks can be in every different area of at any given time, right? It's not really a continuum. You can bounce back through the different pieces and parts of the system pretty quickly. So in terms of thinking about how City with Dwellings helps folks, another way to look at this is we really work on what we call a program-centered approach. A person-centered approach rather than truly a program-centered. So, when we're talking about homelessness, we're really talking about a lot more than shelter. We are talking about prevention and safety and support and resources and community, all those things. We have 12 folks on our staff right now. And Molly's there in the middle with her house key. And she represents, I think, she's representative of the kinds of clients that we might help. So Molly was living under a bridge for many years. And over time, we worked to help her uncover options for housing. That was through our diversion and our outreach work. We helped her navigate the system. She may have needed to have an ID, a government ID, in order to be eligible for some government assistance. She also needed a permanent address. We have permanent addresses for over 300 folks at our day center in Winston-Salem, because you can't get food stamps if you don't have a permanent address. And so we offer a permanent address for folks so that they can get the benefits that they need. We help them with the documentation, because sometimes it's complicated to get a birth certificate, and we help walk them through that. So we might have helped Molly with those kinds of things. We probably provided her with emergency overflow shelter in the winter, because it gets cold under a bridge when we have weather like we've had this last week or so. And then when the pandemic hit, we helped her navigate both homelessness and the pandemic. So things became a little more complicated. Given the risk of outbreak in congregant shelters, where folks were all in the same room together, City with Dwellings actually worked with other homeless service providers to create a safe space for our neighbors like Molly. So we helped move Molly and about 50 other homeless folks into a local motel, where community and church partners actually provided 3 meals a day, and on-site staff connected them with resources and worked on independent living skills and things like that. As a result of the hotel experience, Molly and really about 50 other neighbors were able to move into their own apartment as a result in the early spring of last year. And we can continue to provide support for Molly, depending on the program that she's in the supportive housing, to make sure that she is going to be successful in that setting. And Molly continues to worship with the dwelling, which Molly mentioned at the beginning. The dwelling is our partner in the service that we provide. They actually share space with us at 520 North Spring Street. And they are a mission community. They're a church. It is a partnership between the Moravians and the Lutherans. And here you can see their shower trailer. They have a ministry where they move a shower trailer around the community. One day a week, they're in front of the Samaritan ministry. On Sundays, they're in front of our building. They actually provide a space for worship and have church. They're having church right now at our community center. And they actually have about 100 folks coming every Sunday. It's a mixture of folks experiencing homelessness, former members of our homeless community, and then volunteers and others who are caring for and or enjoying the worship and the experience that they have there. So this ministry is really important, and we really appreciate all that they do to help us, especially when we have things like winter weather. They provide important help and volunteer support as well for some of that kind of thing. So it's confusing because the dwelling and City with Dwellings it looks similar. We are separate entities, but we share space and we share resources. So that can be rather confusing, but Emily is the pastor of the dwelling. She also serves as a part-time communications person for City with Dwellings. So some of what you see on maybe social media looks similar because the same person is creating that information. So that's sort of a snapshot of City with Dwellings and the dwelling. And then I'd leave you with the idea that, it's important, I think, to remember that while we think of homelessness as a problem, and certainly it is a problem for those without a home, it is not the problem. It's a symptom of many larger issues: systemic failures, poverty, addiction, domestic violence, lack of housing, deinstitutionalization. There are a lot of different factors here. It's very complex, and every story of homelessness is unique, but almost everyone does share the experience of trauma, and the trauma that leads people to become homeless and the trauma that's experienced while people are homeless has to be dealt with in order for them to have a chance at escaping it. And City with Dwellings is working to become a more trauma-informed and trauma-resilient community for ourselves and for the neighbors that we serve. We really do believe that community is the key to healing and wholeness and housing for our neighbors without homes. It was really timely. I saw this morning that Rusty Rushing, who pastors Little Church on the Lane and Peace Moravian in Charlotte. He posted this quote. It was actually more of it from Henry Nouwen's book, Bread for the Journey, on Facebook. And it's a reference to Philippians 2:3-5. Don't do anything for selfish purposes, but with humility think of others as better than yourselves. Instead of each person watching out for their own good, watch out for what is better for others. And that's really what we try to do at the Community First Center at City with Dwellings, is build supportive community for our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness, so that they have someone who can be that social safety net, that support as they walk along, and we walk along with them as they try to navigate their way toward housing or whatever flourishing looks like for them. And so sometimes I think the challenge here is, it's really easy to quote Matthew 25 and talk about the least of these, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And so I challenge us to move beyond the least of these kind of attitude as we serve and think about the more nuanced definition of community, as Nouwen talks about it here, and really moving toward that Micah 6, what does the Lord require of you, right? It's to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with our God. And the justice part can be difficult and tricky, especially when we're talking about issues like homelessness. But I do think home church is really well positioned for this work. I mean, your mission, fulfilling Christ's call to love God, to live in community and serve our neighbor, and your vision, a church engaged, a community healed, a world transformed. I mean, we invite you guys to work with us to transform our community. There's a lot of work to be done. And you're asking yourself probably, well, what can I do? You could talk to Nat about that. He could probably tell you a lot about what you could do. But you can also stay tuned and join me on the 16th, when we'll take a little deeper dive into sort of the root causes of homelessness, talk a little more about trauma and the role it plays, not just with individuals, but our community. And I've got a lot more to say, and I'm happy to say it on February 16th. So thank you. And I will stop talking. And if anyone has questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen too here.
Are there questions?
Ruth, this is Beth. There was an interesting article in our Sunday paper in the Winston-Salem Journal about, I don't know who all saw that, but it was about a homeless man who would not leave his beloved dog behind. And he was panhandling. He had a permit from the city to do that, and made some connections with people, and apparently has gotten a lot of support. So I just wondered how that article might impact City with Dwellings, and how, one story can turn into other stories for other people.
I actually read that this morning. And he has been in touch with City with Dwellings, and we often, we are in connection with, there are about 225 folks on any given night in Winston-Salem that are street homeless, what we call street homeless. And he would be one of those folks. And he has been in touch with us, and we're aware of the challenges. Folks who are street homeless often have a lot of challenges, particularly around their animals, if they have animals. And we actually have been talking to another nonprofit who does animal rescue and collects food and other kinds of stuff for folks who have animals. It is a little tricky because there are some challenges with that, but all those kind of stories always lead us. We try to be really collaborative in our work, so it always leads us to start thinking, how could we help this? And we are not, a year-round shelter, so we are kind of limited in terms of what we can do. But frankly, I think what could be the most helpful for him would be for us to help him get housed, so that he can be in a place where he and his dog can thrive, potentially. I don't know if that answers your question, Beth, but that's my thinking.
Yes, that certainly it's not an easy situation, I'm sure, with the animals. But what is the solution for more housing in Winston-Salem? I mean, who's in charge of that, and where do you start? And that's a big problem.
It is a big problem, and housing is really, it's complex, unfortunately, and there are a lot of interests that come to bear on it. The city of Winston-Salem is really kind of what I'd call the fiscal agent, I guess, for HUD. HUD has, all the money that they get from the various sources in the federal budget. It gets passed down to the city, who really is responsible for making sure that all those experiencing homelessness have a decent place to stay. So far, the city's primary response, I guess, is a system of shelters. And so, we've developed this homeless services system, like you saw the map of. But we are honestly pretty overwhelmed just trying to keep folks safe and well as best we can. And so working on affordable housing is tricky. There are some advocacy organizations like Housing Justice Now and others out there who are doing some things. The city works with developers. There's not a lot of incentive to be a landlord who takes folks who have permanent supportive housing vouchers, like from the Housing Authority, public housing. At this point, the housing market or inventory, even for folks like, think about my adult children. I mean, my son would have trouble finding affordable housing based on his salary. He works full time for the city of Winston-Salem, but he would struggle with his student loans, right, and his other debt to be able to afford even a basic apartment in Winston-Salem. So there are multiple levels of groups, right, who are struggling for housing. But a landlord's certainly going to rent to someone like my son before they're going to rent to someone like the fella in the article this morning, right, who's got a lot of different challenges. And there, so it's fairly complex. We have good folks on our board and on our staff who understand the complexity of a lot of these issues. The challenge for us often is getting off the hamster wheel of the day-to-day direct service that we provide in order to figure out the best way to make an impact. So, but there are some webinars on our website. If you go to citywithdwellings.org, there, I think it says roots and responses or advocacy maybe, and watching those might be helpful in terms of giving you more context about the whole affordable housing issue, because it's a big one.
Ruth, do you have a series or a group of social workers on your staff who can help homeless be rid of the cause of their homelessness? Financial advisors or work people or people who work with addicts to get to the root of their issue?
Another complicated answer or question, right? Our folks are, I would really call them navigators, and who walk alongside folks as they try to navigate the system and figure out what they might need to do and set some goals in order to become housed. And we collaborate and connect people to the kind of resources that you're talking about. And a lot of the folks that we work with, like I said, are unsheltered homeless or are chronically homeless whose issues are very complex and multi-layered and not easily fixable. And our system is one that, really beginning back in the days, I guess the Reagan era, when he deinstitutionalized, the mental health hospitals, remember, and released a lot of folks out with the community supports that they were going to get to enable them to live in community. And those community supports weren't there. Those community supports are still very inconsistent and not always effective or absent altogether. So there are gaps in the system, but we do our best to try and connect folks to the places in the system who can help them. If it's not basic needs like shelter and food and clothing, then things like mental health resources or physical health, or getting them connected to their disability benefits or, income or whatever it might take to help them move along that continuum a little further. Interestingly enough, with City with Dwellings, I think because our roots are from the church and faith-based communities and volunteer-driven, really none of our folks, including me, are social workers per se. We're all people who care deeply about this community of people and who I think have some natural intuition around how to be person-centered with people. Of course, one of the things I'm working pretty hard on is to try to also make sure we have more professional
To know if it's hard to assist to make a dog a therapy animal or an emotional support.
I don't really know the answer to that. I would, if I had any of my outreach people here, I would turn that question over to them. I mean, we've had many, we operate a day center 3 mornings a week where our folks come on in and we help them navigate the system, and they get some coffee and talk to folks. And sometimes we have dogs in there if it works out, if they're good dogs. And we do know that our Samaritan Ministry shelter has a policy around emotional support animals and whatever, the assisted animals. Bethesda's working on theirs, but it really is interesting because it just creates a whole nother, we almost need like a whole nother group of people who are helping with the animals, because really we're doing all we can with the people, So, I just visited last week the Interactive Resource Center in Greensboro, which is sort of our counterpart in Greensboro. And they have a huge building, and they actually have some kennels and some crates, which is great because they can then accept folks in their overflow shelter who have pets because they can safely have them crated. We don't have that option at this point. But hopefully, depending on how some of our conversations go with some of our other nonprofit friends, we might be able to provide some kind of solution. But the shelters are well aware of the problem, and it's one of many, barriers to both shelter and housing for our folks.
Ruth, we hear a lot about overflow shelters. How many beds are normally available for the homeless at night that are not considered overflow? We have circles who are going to provide meals for that and so forth.
Well, the shelter system in Winston, primarily you've got, I would say, 3 basic traditional shelters. That's Samaritan Ministries, Bethesda Center, and then Salvation Army. The Salvation Army just takes families, and their capacity, actually the capacity in all the shelters is much lower right now because of COVID. I think pre-COVID, we could, in those 3 shelters, accommodate around 200 people. I couldn't even tell you right now what the capacity is on the shelters because it is lower because of COVID. And right now the shelters are full, the traditional shelters. So then from December to March, City with Dwellings operates the overflow shelter, which is this: when the traditional shelters are full, we provide beds. Now, again, due to COVID, we've had to lower our capacity as well. So this year we are operating 2 shelters. We have Augsburg Lutheran hosts 20 men, up to 20 men in their fellowship center, and St. Timothy's Episcopal hosts up to 20 women in their fellowship center. We also do what's called a white flag shelter, which is a winter weather shelter, basically. It's when the temperature drops below freezing or there's precipitation. We open that up. And New Story Church, which is over on Trademark Boulevard off of Peters Creek, they offer that, that space for up to 20 folks. And then, we rely heavily on volunteers at that point at each of the church locations to provide meals, to do check-in, and then we pay 2 monitors to stay overnight. They do 12-hour shifts with our guests so that our guests can have a good night's rest. And it's been more difficult since COVID to have volunteers, and we don't really want our volunteers to have to, we hope that they'll decide for themselves what's safe for them, but we also want to minimize risk in that area too. Did I answer your question? Every question is so complicated.
Are there other questions? Comments? Nat, you're muted.
I want to say how amazing it is how much Ruth has learned in such a short period of time.
It's been a lot. You're right.
And I would appreciate, this is Margaret, you reminding everybody, since you're speaking here again soon, when that's taking place. Thank you.
Sure. February 16th for the Wednesday night program. And hopefully maybe, you know, I won't be on Zoom at that point. I'll be able to be there in person, depending if we've hit our peak here. And I hope to, I may hit a little bit of the same stuff I talked about today, but I hope we can also do a little deeper dive into some of these issues at that point. So I love the speaking because it forces me to learn, right? And figure it out as I go. So I appreciate the invitation.
Well, I'm very thankful for your leadership now with this terrific problem in our city and in our country and so forth. But especially you bring to us as Moravians the challenge to be the Christians we're supposed to be. And facts are facts. We need to look at those facts and respond to those facts. Are there other questions?
I was just going to add, you know, if you're contemplating maybe volunteering, there are some opportunities. And I would encourage you to talk with Nat. Nat's one of our really great volunteers who comes to the center when it's safe to do so. And he could give you a little more insight as to sort of, you know, what volunteering is like. And it's really not for everybody, but you usually know it right away, whether or not it is. So I'm sorry, somebody was going to say something.
Ruth, this is Paul Morse. I was, hi, it's good to see you. We've missed you. I wanted to say, you made a comment earlier about Greensboro has a way of dealing with the animals that homeless folks have. Was the only reason that Winston-Salem can't do that we lack the crates, or was there some other issue? What keeps us? So many times folks have a hard time relating to humans, and they can relate to animals better, and so they're going to stay out, or they're going to pose some problems just because you're not able to accept their animal with them.
Right. I don't really know, Paul. I'm not really sure, you know, what again, I'm sure it's layered, but I don't really know all the ins and outs of why that hasn't really been able to happen yet. Hopefully with some of our conversations, I'm in conversation often with the director at Samaritan. And I do think that agency to agency collaboration can help solve some of these barriers. You know, once we get more connected to one another. So I'm hopeful.
We thank you. We thank you. I remind our audience that next Sunday we will hear from Sister Donna Hurt. She will be sharing recent information about Sierra Leone. And we look forward to that, hopefully in person. I'll just have to let you know, working with Margaret. I will say Zoom is so good because I can hear everything. And this was a suggestion from Ruth because she is in contact with people who are compromised with the pandemic. And I appreciate this. Following Sierra Leone next week, the first Sunday, February the 6th, Bishop Chris Giesler will be with us to give an overview at worship and in Sunday school of the Board of World Mission. He is on the staff there, and so we look forward to that. Each of these people has prepared a sheet with requested information, and we will give that to you when we see you in person or maybe online, of service, of prayer, of generosity, of how we can support each of these agencies. I
And
also want Beth.
Mally, what I was going to say is I am happy to, again, this is Margaret. I'm happy also to direct email that to the people who are here in this Sunday school class so that they can have it.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be great. Beth, you want to say anything about T-shirts? You and Sandy made a wonderful order blank when we're going to maybe be able to start that. T-shirts in honor of our 250th anniversary, sponsored by the World Mission Team.
Well, we hope to have that in the works. We've been a little bit delayed by holidays and COVID and other weather and other issues, but we are working on having aprons, t-shirts, and sweatshirts available for all ages and sizes. And we will get that out to you as soon as possible, probably online. But the monies from our t-shirt fundraiser will be used for mission projects.
Are there other questions or comments? Margaret, I turn back to you.
All right, friends, thank you all. And you've heard about upcoming Sunday school from Mally. And also we've heard about the February 16th Wednesday night fellowship. And again, starting next week, Craig Atwood's going to do 2 Wednesday night fellowship sessions. So thank you all.
I want to say one more thing. On Tuesday of this week, I spent 6 hours in the ER at Wake Forest Baptist Health because I fell and broke my wrist. I hope that in your prayer time and support, you will pray for our medical people. I was fortunate, 6 hours, but I had gone to urgent care and I had a plan before I got to the emergency room, but I had to go there because they needed the equipment to put my wrist back in order, we hope. Those people are working so hard for our community. The number of people who were there, and I will tell you, Frank and I didn't want to be there because the scare of COVID, having been vaccinated and booster and everything. I said to the intake nurse, I said, how long? This was about maybe 5 o'clock afternoon. I said, how long have you been here? She said, I came to work at 7:30 this morning and I hope to leave at 8 o'clock. That's a lot to ask of these people. So please be thankful and prayerful for those people. And I can talk about teachers too, because that's on my heart too. But I'm so aware of that when I go and I do, and I had a network. Most of these people don't have a network. I went to a doctor contacted a doctor, and even though it took a long time, there was a plan. So that's my request for today. Bye, Mark.
Thank you, Mally, because it's so timely and it's so true. And we also want to thank you for putting this Epiphany Mission Sunday School together. And thank you, Ruth, for joining us. And we'll see you all again next week.